Well, today and for the next few weeks, we're going to be talking a little bit about prayer. And today we're talking about how to uncomplicate prayer. And we're going to take a look at the Lord's Prayer from the New Testament. We're here with Pastor Ross. And Ross, thanks for joining us on this. Why do you think some people complicate prayer so much?
Well, culture and tradition hand us down all these rituals. And so people just look at prayer as somehow different from talking to anybody else. So am I supposed to talk loud? Am I supposed to fold my hands a certain way? Am I supposed to use certain verbiage, certain language? Do I have to talk thee and thou? And so all those things make us wonder what prayer is really all about.
Well, and the good news is apparently Jesus' closest friends, the disciples, wondered the same thing because in Matthew chapter 6, they basically came to Jesus. And I love this. They said, Lord, teach us how to pray. And coming out of that, we get this famous Lord's Prayer. And ironically, I think some people use the Lord's Prayer to complicate prayer.
Right.
Rather than to uncomplicate it.
Right. Because they use it as a ritual or a way to just recite. Yeah.
So we're going to help them because today we're going to break down just a few things in that prayer and going to really try to uncomplicate it for people. So here's the first thing. Pray to grow close to the Father, like you're in an actual relationship with Him.
The simplest way to uncomplicate prayer is to realize that it's just a way of having a conversation in a relationship.
Right, so in Matthew 6, verse 9, Jesus says, pray like this, our Father in heaven, may your name be kept holy.
Right, so we know God is holy, God is in heaven. Those are some things that make God seem distant from us maybe. But he says we have the privilege of addressing God as a father, even intimately, even as dad. And so it's a relationship. Prayer is simply talking to our dad.
And some people might really have a hard time with that because maybe they don't have a great relationship with their dad. What would you say to that kind of a person?
Yeah, but even growing up, if maybe you had a tough relationship with your dad, you still had an ideal idea of what dad would like. Or maybe you had friends who had their dads, you go, man, I wish he was my dad. So we still have an idea of what that could be.
Yeah, and that's what Jesus is saying is come to Him like He's your Father, because He is. Like He cares about you, like He wants to meet your needs, like He really wants to be involved in your life.
Exactly.
All right, so here's the second thing then. Pray to get in step with your King for His will to be done and not yours. What do we mean by that?
Well, here's the thing. We just said that God is our Father, so we have this intimacy with Him. But He's not like the indulgent dad. He's not like the Disneyland dad, right? He's also the king. Our Father's also the king, that He rules everything. And so we have to take into account that He has a plan, He has a will, that He's in charge.
And that's what Jesus is saying in verse 10 there. He says, may your kingdom come soon. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I love that Jesus is telling His disciples and us, He's saying, pray for God's will to be done. Don't pray for your will to be done. And I love, Ross, you're the one who taught me this. How is God's will done in heaven?
It's done imperfectly. There's no like say one thing, do something else.
Right.
There's no partial obedience. There's no passive aggressive angels, in heaven. It's perfect.
Yeah, what would it be like, parents, if every time you asked your kids to do something, they did it right away the first time? It'd be pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And that's how heaven's going to be.
Exactly.
And Jesus is saying this. He's saying, pray that the way God's will is done in heaven is also done that way on earth. And we don't really have control over everyone else's obedience to God, but we have control over our obedience to God. Right?
So I can certainly pray for the extension of God's kingdom and His will in the lives of other people and the nations and so forth. But in a sense, this prayer is an admission that God's will is not done perfectly in my life. And so that's really where I start.
All right, here's the third thing. Pray to lean on your provider because you need what only He can offer, right? Unpack this for us.
Well, one of the things about prayer is that it's an acknowledgement of dependence. That's why a lot of people don't really like to pray, because we don't like to admit that we're dependent. We want to be independent when it comes to all of our needs. This is an admission that we're not independent.
Yeah, and this section is a little bit more involved. Starting in verse 11, Jesus says, pray like this, give us today the food we need. So there's one thing.
Right.
In verse 12, he says, and forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. So there's a spiritual need that we have. And then in verse 13, he says, don't let us yield to temptation, but rescue us from the evil one. So in each one of those, we can unpack that a little bit more. Maybe with your small groups you can this week. But he's saying that he is our provider in all these ways,
Right.
physically,
Right.
spiritually, even when it comes to temptation.
Right. So I'm dependent for his daily provision. I'm dependent for the forgiveness of my sins. I'm dependent for the challenges I'm going to face every day. And I want to be prepared for those challenges by prayer.
And that's kind of the point, is Jesus is teaching us that prayer is about having it is about relationship, like we said, but it's about being in proper relationship to God. We come to God and we recognize who we are in relationship to him. And that's how we're bringing our requests to him.
Right, exactly.